Be Me Max, 28. Got a pretty normal life. Work a job that involves my hands fixing complex machinery. I like when things make sense. You have a problem, you find the cause, you apply a solution. A to B to C. Simple. My girlfriend Julie was with me for about 2 years at that point. When we first met, things were great. Easy, collaborative. We were a team. I'd cook, she'd clean. I'd fix her car. She'd plan a weekend trip for us. It just worked. The last 6 months or so, though, something started to change. It was slow at first. I barely noticed. It started with her phone. She was always on it, scrolling through articles and videos from these weird wellness and empowerment gurus. The language started seeping into our conversations. At first, it was just buzzwords. I'd come home from a long day, say I was tired. Used to be she'd say, "Oh no, let me get you a drink." Now it was, "You need to protect your masculine energy better. Your aura is drained." I'd just nod. What are you supposed to say to that? It really ramped up a few months back. She wanted a new set of shelves for the living room, the big complicated kind from IKEA with 1,000 pieces. No problem. I spent a whole Saturday putting it together. Little Allen key, confusing diagrams with a smiling cartoon man. The usual nightmare. I finally get it done, anchor it to the wall, looks perfect. I'm standing there, sweating, covered in sawdust, feeling pretty accomplished. She walks in, glances at it for 2 seconds, phone still in her hand. "Cool," she says, and then shows me a video of some lady talking about how modern men have lost their ancestral drive to build and provide. She told me the act of me building the shelf was a good sign, that I was tapping into that primal energy. It wasn't a compliment, it was like I was a lab rat who just pressed the right button. She didn't thank me for the shelf, she analyzed my behavior. A week later, she spills a whole mug of coffee on her laptop. Total panic. She has a bunch of work on there she needs. I tell her not to worry, I'll take a look. I spent the next 5 hours carefully taking the whole thing apart, piece by tiny piece, cleaning every contact with isopropyl alcohol, drying everything out. It was delicate, frustrating work. I managed to save it. The thing boots up like nothing ever happened. I bring it to her. She's on her phone again, of course. She takes the laptop, checks her files, and gives a little sigh of relief. Then she looks at me and says something that just stuck with me. She said, "It's a man's job to solve problems and create stability." She was glad to see I was capable of fulfilling my masculine role in the relationship. Again, not a thank you. It was a performance review. I just stood there, smelling like burnt coffee and plastic, and realized I wasn't her partner anymore. I was an employee on probation. The real shift, the one I couldn't ignore, started about a month ago. The physical affection just stopped, completely. It was like a switch was flipped overnight. No more hugs when I got home. No more holding hands when we were out. If I tried to put my arm around her on the couch, she'd tense up and gently move away. In bed, she'd turn her back to me, creating a wall of pillows. The entire apartment felt like it had dropped 20 degrees. After a few days of this, I decided I had to address it head on. My brain works on logic, problem identified, sudden lack of affection. Step 1, find the cause. I waited until we were having dinner. I made her favorite pasta. I asked her straight up, "Hey, is everything okay? You've seemed really distant lately." She put her fork down and gave me this long, patient look, the kind you give a child who doesn't understand something simple. She explained that our relationship had entered a new phase. It was time for a conscious reevaluation of our dynamic. She told me that physical intimacy had been a crutch for us, a way to avoid doing the real work. I asked her what the real work was. Big mistake. I got a 30-minute lecture. It was all about how she was focusing on her divine feminine energy, and that my role as the masculine presence was to create a safe and stable container for that energy. According to her, and the guru she was watching, a man proves his worth not through physical connection, but by demonstrating his commitment and provision. I just stared at her. It was like she was speaking a different language. I asked, "So, you don't want me to touch you anymore?" She sighed, exasperated. "It's not about want. It's about what's necessary for our growth. A woman's intimacy is a reward for a man's dedication. It's not a given." I felt like I was in a business negotiation I never agreed to. The next week was hell. I went into full-on fix-it mode. If this was a test, I was determined to pass it. I just had no idea what the questions were. I figured, okay, provision and commitment. I can do that. I started doing even more around the house. Deep cleaning, organizing the closets, doing all the grocery shopping. I'd get home from my job and then start my second shift at our apartment. Her reaction? She said I was focusing on low-value domestic tasks and avoiding the deeper emotional labor. Okay, strike one. So I tried a different approach. Gifts, demonstrating I can provide. I bought her a beautiful necklace she'd pointed out in a store window months ago. It wasn't cheap. I thought I'd finally cracked the code. I gave it to her. She opened the box, looked at the necklace, and then looked at me with this disappointed expression. She said that trying to solve an emotional and spiritual issue with a material object was a classic example of toxic masculinity. She accused me of trying to buy her affection. She didn't even take it out of the box, just closed it and put it on the dresser where it sat for days like a little monument to my failure. Strike two. I was getting desperate. I was lonely. I missed my girlfriend. I missed the easy way we used to be. I missed the feeling of being on a team. Now I felt like I was constantly being watched, judged, and graded by a person I was supposed to love. The silence in the apartment was deafening. The only sounds were the clicking of her nails on her phone screen and the faint sound of some self-help guru's voice from her earbuds. I tried to talk to her again. I told her I was unhappy. I told her I felt lost and that I missed her. I was being vulnerable, open, honest, all the things you're supposed to be. She told me my feelings of unhappiness were a sign that I was finally growing. She said that discomfort is a catalyst for change, and that I should lean into it instead of complaining. She literally pathologized my sadness and repackaged it as a positive step in my journey. My own feelings were being used as evidence that her weird experiment was working. That was strike three. I felt completely trapped. The final straw came on a Friday night. I'd had a brutal week at work. A major piece of equipment went down, and I'd been pulling 12-hour shifts to get it back online. I was exhausted, mentally, physically, emotionally. I came home, hoping for just an ounce of peace. Julie was in the living room. She'd lit some candles and was meditating. I sat on the couch, waiting for her to finish. When she opened her eyes, she looked at me with an air of profound wisdom. She told me she had a breakthrough. She said the universe had told her that the reason our energies weren't aligning was because I wasn't ambitious enough. She said my contentment with my job was a sign of stagnation. She suggested I should look into getting a different job, a management position maybe. Something that would provide more financial security and social status. She had a whole plan laid out. I should take night classes, get some certification. I just looked at her. I work with my hands. I'm good at it. I enjoy it. It pays the bills and then some. But it wasn't good enough, because it didn't fit into the narrative she was building from her phone screen. I was a fixer-upper project to her. Another thing in her life that needed to be optimized and upgraded. I didn't say anything. I had no words left. The logical part of my brain, the part that solves problems, just shut down. There was no solution here, no A to B to C. You can't fix something that is intentionally broken. You can't win a game when the rules change every time you make a move. I just got up and walked out of the room. I didn't know where to go. I just needed to be out of that apartment. I ended up in the garage of our building. We had a small designated storage space there. It was more like a large cage. It was filled with junk. Old furniture, holiday decorations, boxes of stuff we never unpacked when we moved in. It was my space, technically. She never went down there. It was dusty and had spiders. I unlocked the padlock and went inside, pulling the rolling door down behind me. It was damp and smelled like concrete and old cardboard. I sat down on an old trunk. For the first time in weeks, I was in a place where I wasn't being evaluated. The silence here wasn't heavy or judgmental. It was just empty. I felt completely and utterly defeated. I had tried everything. I had been patient. I had been communicative. I had been giving. And every single effort was thrown back in my face as a flaw. My kindness was a weakness. My practicality was a lack of emotional depth. My contentment was a lack of ambition. It was a game I was designed to lose. The whole point wasn't for me to succeed. The whole point was the test itself. She enjoyed the power it gave her. I sat there in the dark for what felt like an hour. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just tired. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion. I thought about our first date, how we laughed, how easy it was. I wondered where that person went. If she was still in there somewhere, buried under layers of pop psychology and online gurus. I realized it didn't matter. The person I was living with was a stranger, and she was making me miserable. My eyes started to adjust to the dim light filtering in from the streetlights outside. I looked around the cluttered space, and then I saw it. In the back corner, tucked behind a stack of flattened boxes, covered in a dusty old tarp, a shape I hadn't thought about in a long time. I got up and walked over, my footsteps echoing in the quiet garage. I pulled the tarp off. There it was. The frame and engine of a 1970 Triumph Bonneville. I bought it right before I met Julie, a basket case project. It was my dream to restore it, to build a custom bike from the ground up, with my own two hands. I was so excited about it. I spent weeks collecting parts, reading manuals. Then I met Julie, and life got busy. The bike was forgotten. It became another thing I'd get to someday. I ran my hand over the cold, dusty metal of the engine block. Unlike my relationship, this was real. This was tangible. It was a problem with a solution. A complex, difficult, multi-step solution, but a solution nonetheless. It wouldn't change the rules on me. It wouldn't question my motives. It would just be what it was. A machine waiting to be brought back to life. A thought sparked in my head. A clear, simple, and powerful thought. I had been spending all my energy trying to fix something that didn't want to be fixed. My time, my money, my emotional bandwidth, all of it was being poured into a black hole of manipulative tests and shifting goalposts. What if I just stopped? What if I took all that energy and put it into this instead? Into something that would give back what I put in? I stood there in that dusty cage, looking at the bones of that old motorcycle. And for the first time, in a very long time, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't confusion or despair. It was hope. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment everything changed. The test was over. Not because I had passed, or because I had failed, but because I had decided to stop playing. I went back up to the apartment that night and didn't say a word about the bike. Julie was still in the living room, scrolling on her phone. She looked up as I walked in, probably expecting an apology or another attempt at a deep conversation. I just walked past her into the kitchen, got a glass of water, and went to bed. I slept in the spare room, told her I was snoring, and didn't want to wake her. It wasn't a lie. I was so exhausted I probably could have woken the dead. But it was also about creating a space, my space. The next morning, I woke up before she did. I went down to the garage with a roll of paper towels and some cleaner. I spent 2 hours just cleaning the grease and grime off the motorcycle's frame and engine. It was meditative work, just me, the metal, and the smell of WD-40. I found the box of parts I'd collected all that time ago. Carburetor kits, new gaskets, a wiring harness. It was all there. I laid everything out on an old blanket, taking inventory. It was a mess, but it was a beautiful, logical mess. My mess. When I got back upstairs, Julie was making a smoothie. She asked me where I'd been. Her tone wasn't curious, it was accusatory. Like I'd broken some unspoken rule. I just said, down in the storage unit, organizing some stuff. She gave me a suspicious look. You're suddenly interested in organizing? You should channel that energy into your career. I didn't take the bait. I just shrugged and made myself some coffee. This became the new routine. I'd go to work, come home. I'd make a simple dinner for myself. I stopped trying to cook her favorite meals. If she was home, she could eat what I made or make her own. After eating, I'd go straight to the garage. I started bringing my laptop down there, setting up a little workstation on a stack of milk crates. I ordered a heavy-duty workbench online and a proper set of tools. The money I would have spent on that necklace, on expensive dinners to try and appease her, it all went into the bike. A new set of spoked wheels, a custom leather seat, a classic teardrop gas tank I found on eBay from a guy in another country. The storage cage started to transform. It went from being a junk pile to a functional workshop. My workshop. At first, Julie seemed almost smug about it. She probably told her online friends that her masculine polarity techniques were working, that she'd successfully pushed me into a masculine frame by sending me to my cave to work on a project. She'd occasionally make comments when I came upstairs, covered in grease. It's good for a man to work with his hands. It grounds your energy. I'd just nod and head for the shower. I stopped engaging in those conversations. It's amazing how much power you take back when you just stop explaining yourself. I wasn't doing it for her. I wasn't doing it to impress her or pass her test. I was doing it for me, and she just couldn't comprehend that. My actions had to be about her. In her worldview, she was the sun, and I was just a planet orbiting her. The days turned into weeks. The frame was stripped and powder-coated a deep classic black. I spent an entire weekend rebuilding the engine, piston rings, bearings, polishing the cylinder heads until they gleamed. It was the most focused I'd been in years. When I was in that garage, the rest of the world just disappeared. No mind games, no passive aggression, no feeling of being constantly inadequate. It was just me and the machine. I started to change too, lugging that heavy engine block around, wrestling with stuck bolts, spending hours hunched over the frame. It was physically demanding. I was getting stronger. My shoulders broadened. My forearms looked like they belonged to a mechanic, not some guy who sat on the couch trying to guess his girlfriend's mood. I lost that soft, defeated look I'd had for months. I also started connecting with people again. I got stuck on a wiring problem that had me completely stumped. After 3 days of frustration, I posted a question on an online forum for vintage motorcycle enthusiasts. Within an hour, I had 3 detailed replies from old-timers who had forgotten more about these bikes than I would ever know. No judgment, no condescension, just guys helping another guy out. One of them lived a few towns over. He ran a small, independent shop. He invited me to come by on a Saturday. I wheeled the frame and engine over in the back of my truck. He was this old, grizzled guy with tattoos covering his arms. He looked at my work, nodded slowly, and said, "Not bad for a first-timer." Coming from him, it felt like winning a Nobel Prize. We spent the afternoon working on the wiring together. He showed me tricks that weren't in any manual. I found a community, a brotherhood, I guess, men who valued tangible skills and mutual respect. It was a world away from the vague, judgmental landscape of my relationship. The shift in Julie started to become more obvious around the 2-month mark. Her smug satisfaction had faded, replaced by a growing sense of confusion and then irritation. My independence was starting to bother her. I was no longer a captive audience for her lectures. I was no longer the sad puppy dog following her around, begging for a scrap of affection. I was happy, and it had nothing to do with her. This was a fundamental violation of the rules of her game. The whole point of the test was to make me dependent on her approval. But I had found approval elsewhere, in the satisfying click of a socket wrench, in the hum of a well-oiled machine, in the nod of respect from a fellow builder. She started trying to pull me back into her orbit. The passive aggression started to get less passive. She'd complain that the apartment smelled like oil when I came in. She'd leave articles open on her laptop about the dangers of men using hobbies to avoid emotional intimacy. One evening, I was heading down to the garage, and she stood in the doorway, blocking my path. She was holding 2 plates of food she'd cooked for the first time in months. "I thought we could have dinner together," she said. "We barely talk anymore." The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. I looked at her, then at the plates. I said, "Okay, let me just go wash up." We sat at the dinner table in silence. It wasn't the comfortable silence of old, but the tense, awkward silence of 2 strangers. She started asking me questions about the bike, but her questions were all wrong. They were loaded. "So, how much money have you spent on that thing? Do you really think it's healthy to spend all your free time alone in a basement? Are you ever going to finish it, or is this just another thing you'll start and not complete?" It was another test, a new one. She was trying to undermine my project, to frame it as a flaw, a waste of time and money. I gave her short, non-committal answers. "A bit. It's been productive. It'll be done when it's done." I wasn't giving her any emotional reaction to work with. No anger, no defensiveness. I was a gray rock. It was driving her crazy. She was the one who wanted to withhold emotional connection. But now that I was doing it, she couldn't stand it. The real desperation started to leak through. She began to change her tactics. The withholding was no longer working, so she started dangling the things she had taken away. She'd start wearing less around the apartment. She'd accidentally brush against me in the hallway. She'd sit on the arm of the couch while I was watching TV, a little closer than usual. But it was all so transparent, so calculated. It wasn't genuine affection, it was a lure. It was like she was a fisherman who had been trying to starve the fish into biting, and when that didn't work, she was now throwing the fanciest bait she had into the water. But I wasn't hungry anymore. I had learned to feed myself. I saw her actions not as a sign of her wanting me, but as a sign of her losing control. And it repulsed me. I remember one night very clearly. I had just managed to get the engine back in the frame. It was a huge milestone. I had to use a makeshift hoist, and it was a real struggle, but I did it. I was standing there, admiring my work, feeling this incredible sense of pride. The bike was starting to look like a real motorcycle. I got upstairs late, around 11 p.m. I was about to head to the spare room when I saw the light was on in our bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. Julie called my name. Her voice was soft, the way it used to be. I hesitated, then pushed the door open. She was in bed. The lights were dim. She was wearing something she hadn't worn in a very long time. She patted the space next to her. "Come to bed," she said with a small smile. "I miss you." A few months ago, those words would have been everything I wanted to hear. I would have melted. I would have thought I had finally won. But standing there, in the doorway, smelling of gasoline and metal polish, I saw the whole thing for what it was. It was a reward, a treat for the dog that had finally learned the trick. But I wasn't her dog anymore. The test she had started was supposed to be about my worth. But somewhere along the line, it had become a test of her character, and she was failing spectacularly. I looked at her, lying there, with her calculated smile and her planned seduction, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not desire, not even pity. Just a quiet, calm, profound nothing. I said, "I'm good here. I'll see you in the morning." I closed the door, leaving her alone in the dim light. I went to the spare room, lay down on the bed, and stared at the ceiling. I realized that my old relationship was gone. It had died weeks ago in that dusty garage, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was never going to try and fix it again. The weeks after that night were defined by a new, heavy tension. My rejection of her advance wasn't just a rejection of intimacy. It was a rejection of her power. I had refused the reward. I had broken the entire framework of her test. Her game was predicated on the idea that what she was withholding was the ultimate prize. My indifference turned her prize into something worthless. Her attempts to regain control became more and more frantic. The calculated seduction was replaced by emotional outbursts. She'd accused me of being cold and distant, of giving up on us. One evening she confronted me as I was coming up from the garage. She was crying, real tears this time. She asked me how I could just shut her out like this, how I could be so cruel. I just stood there, my hands stained with grease. I told her calmly, "I'm not doing anything to you. I'm just doing something for me." This was the truth. My project wasn't about punishing her. It had started as a reaction to her behavior, but it had evolved into something entirely separate. It was about my own self-respect. She couldn't see that. In her mind, everything I did was a move on a chessboard between us. She yelled, "This stupid motorcycle is more important to you than I am." I didn't say anything, because I realized in that moment she was right. That collection of metal and rubber was more important to me, not because I loved it more, but because it was honest. It didn't manipulate me. It didn't play mind games. Its value was real and tangible, based on the work I put into it. My silence was the only answer she needed. She saw it on my face. She stormed off into the bedroom and slammed the door. I just sighed and went to wash my hands. The bike was almost finished. The wiring was done. The new exhaust pipes were fitted, gleaming chrome that curved perfectly around the engine. I'd filled the tank with gas for the first time. The smell of fuel was the smell of potential. The only thing left was to fire it up. This was the moment of truth. After all these months, all these hours, all this work, it would either come to life or it would be a dead hunk of metal. I wheeled it out into the open area of the parking garage. My heart was pounding. I turned the key, flipped the ignition switch, and gave the Kickstarter a firm push. The engine coughed. A puff of smoke came out of the pipes. I kicked it again. It sputtered, fighting for a moment. And then, with a third powerful kick, it happened. The engine roared to life. It wasn't a smooth, clean sound like a modern bike. It was a loud, rumbling, angry growl, a deep mechanical heartbeat that echoed off the concrete walls. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I couldn't help but smile, a huge, genuine, uncontrollable grin. It worked. I did it. I stood there for a full 5 minutes, just letting it run, listening to the rhythm of the engine I had built with my own 2 hands. It was a feeling of accomplishment so pure and so profound that it eclipsed everything else. In that moment, all the drama, all the tests, all the emotional manipulation from upstairs just seemed so small, so insignificant. I spent the next couple of days just tuning it, adjusting the carburetor, checking the timing, getting it to idle just right. I bought a helmet and a good leather jacket. I felt like a different person when I put them on. The guy who used to spend his evenings trying to decipher his girlfriend's moods was gone. In his place was a guy who built a motorcycle. It was a simple declarative statement. I was ready for the first real ride. I didn't tell Julie. I didn't say anything. I waited for a Saturday morning. I got up early, put on my gear, and went down to the garage. I wheeled the Triumph out into the sunlight. It looked incredible. The black paint shone. The chrome glinted. It wasn't perfect. It had character. It was mine. I threw my leg over the seat, turned the key, and kicked it to life. The sound was even better out in the open air. I let it warm up for a minute, then I pulled in the clutch, clicked it into first gear, and slowly rolled out of the parking lot. The feeling of the wind, the vibration of the engine, the connection to the road, it was freedom. I didn't have a destination. I just drove. I went out of the city, found some winding country roads. For the first time in over a year, my mind was completely clear. I wasn't thinking about Julie. I wasn't thinking about our problems. I wasn't thinking about anything but the road in front of me and the machine beneath me. I had created my own escape. I was out for hours. I didn't get back until late in the afternoon. When I pulled into the driveway of our apartment building, I saw her standing on the balcony, watching me. I couldn't see her expression from that distance, but I could feel her staring. I parked the bike, killed the engine, and just sat there for a moment, savoring the feeling. I took off my helmet and walked towards the building entrance. She was waiting for me in the apartment. The moment I walked through the door, it started. This was it, the final confrontation. She didn't yell, she was eerily calm. "So that's it then," she said. "You're just going to leave?" I was confused. "What are you talking about? I went for a ride." "Don't play dumb with me, Max," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "This whole thing, the bike, the ignoring me, you're planning on leaving me." I looked at her, and I didn't have an answer, because the thought hadn't actually formed in my head yet. I had been so focused on the project, on building the bike, that I hadn't thought about the next step. But now, hearing her say it out loud, it sounded right. It sounded like the only logical conclusion. This is where it all came crashing down for her. The reality of the situation finally hit her. All her theories, all her strategies, all the advice from her online gurus. It had all backfired in the most spectacular way. She had wanted to test me, to mold me into her ideal version of a man, a high-value man who was utterly devoted to her. But the test had an unintended side effect. It had forced me to become self-reliant. It had forced me to find value and validation outside of her. She had accidentally created the one thing she couldn't control, a man who didn't need her. Her composure broke. She started pleading. "We can fix this, Max. I was wrong. The whole test thing was stupid. I see that now. I miss you. I miss us." She came towards me, trying to hug me. It was the first time she had initiated a hug in months, but it felt completely hollow. It was a desperate last-ditch effort to put the genie back in the bottle. I didn't push her away, but I didn't hug her back either. I just stood there, a statue in a leather jacket. I told her I needed some time to think. The next few days, I packed my things. A few boxes of clothes, my tools, my books. It didn't take long. Most of my life had already migrated down to the garage anyway. She watched me, a ghost in our apartment. She would alternate between crying, begging, and getting angry, accusing me of throwing away 2 years of our lives. I told her that she was the one who threw it away when she decided our relationship was a science experiment. The final day, I had everything packed into my truck. The last thing to go was me. I stood in the doorway of the apartment that had been my home. Julie was standing in the middle of the living room, looking small and lost. "Where will you go?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I looked at her one last time. "I don't know," I said. "For a ride." And I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I got in my truck and drove away, with the Triumph securely strapped down in the bed. I don't hate her. I don't wish her ill. I just feel nothing. She tried to test the man I was, and in the process she created a man who was strong enough to leave her. Poetic justice, I guess. Now, it's just me and the road, and for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm finally headed in the right direction.